values of these things can be so elevated is partly because when people are buying them, what they're buying is a dice roll at being a more elevated member in some group, in some community.
Wow. All right, here we are, buddy, back in the saddle. How's it going?
Hey, buddy. Pretty good.
Good to hear, man. Likewise. So I wanted to do a quick little video. As you know, we've been kicking around a couple of ideas about the space, the crypto space that we live in, and we've had some interesting discussions around this that I want to get. I want to get more clarity on myself, and I think they'd also be very valuable ideas for a lot of other people in the space because you have an ability to really abstractly explain a lot of or explain something that's quite abstract in more simple terminology. So yeah, I wanted to just start off by asking you about the innovation in the crypto space, in the blockchain industry, where it's headed, where we are currently, what you see like the next big ideas. And this is going to be going to our millions of fans on YouTube. So this is a huge crypto prediction you guys are about to hear. But yeah, buddy, I'd love to hear kind of where your thoughts are.
So where the innovation is going to come out of?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would put it like this way. I as boring of a conclusion as it sounds like, I do think the greatest chance of coming up with a great idea is going to come out of the ETH community, just because it's huge. It's just, if you just look at the raw numbers, that's sort of what it suggests. Like, let's say if all developers were created equal, if 80% of the developers are in this ecosystem, you have an 80% chance of the next great idea coming out of that ecosystem. And that's to say nothing of the likely talent slant that goes to the larger ecosystem as well. If that makes sense.
So it does. What would you say to an argument that I've heard before is like, the ETH community is really trying to build a car as it's driving, where some of these other layer ones have an advantage in the fact that they started off, say, with a concept more fully fleshed out of what they want it to be, where Ethereum is really looking to pivot from it to a different consensus mechanism. And with that, there's a lot more risk. With that, there's a lot more, inherent problems that will have to be solved. And because of that, they're going to lose time.
Yeah, I would say that's not crazy. But I would kind of go back to my original thesis there, that a lot of times the concentration of talent and energy will just overpower a lot of the short-term struggles. If you were to look at like a layer one, some of them have novel takes on the consensus algorithm. They have like the proof of history thing. I think that's Solana, or that's AVAX. They'll have these little takes, these little variations on the formula, and in some way you could make the argument that they might have something really innovative there. But a lot of times they also have some of the inherent scaling problems as the original Ethereum network. Mm-hmm. So in a way, you have the advantage of a clean slate. So you get to start with just a pure proof of stake network, or you get to start with proof of stake plus something else, or you get to start with some completely different consensus mechanism altogether, and you get to try your hand at that. But you are going back to day one also, and you have to attract a pool of developers all over again. And you're eventually going to all be gathered around the same problems as the big network, and you're going to be trying to solve that problem with a smaller number of people and a less understood problem space, because you're on a new chain with different technologies. And so it's got different characteristics that even a smaller number of people understand. So I still think in general, you're probably better off going with you expecting the big changes, the big step function changes to come out of the largest pool of talent. If we look back at the history of the internet and what happened over the last 30 years, we saw the FANG companies fight over these large pools of very talented engineers.
Right.
Google puts together their team of thousands of fantastic engineers, same with Facebook and on down the line. And the reason they do it is to make it more likely that the next good idea comes out of their team and not your team. So we know that that's a successful strategy. And if you want to see where the value comes from out of technology companies or technology innovations, you follow the crowd in a sense that you look for the largest pool of talent, not necessarily the largest pool of users, but the largest group of active, talented engineers, people that are actually building things and looking to make a name for themselves in that arena by solving a big problem.
Yeah, there's a valid that's a valid sentiment. I think it's also one of the other things that I go back to. I believe it was like out of a book, The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, where they talk about it's like in almost every scenario in life, you have just, well, maybe even in every scenario, you have the Pareto principle that takes effect, where you have this, outsized few that dominate the masses, and you have this winner take all type of, world that we live in. And so you have, number one and number two, Bitcoin and Ethereum. But at the same time, which maybe those will be the ones that go the distance, like Bitcoin is proving kind of their store of value thesis, and everyone seems to be building on Ethereum, then forking elsewhere. But at the same time, it's such a disruptive world, or I guess, ecosystem, that a lot of these issues, you just don't see it very likely, perhaps, that they are going to be solved by a smaller community of devs with a different set of tools than.
I would say in a way, it's about being a betting man, right? So, right. If you were playing poker, if you were playing any game of odds, and that's your back of the envelope calculation, that regardless of what you know, if you see that there's an 80% expected value or an 80% likelihood of a certain outcome, then that's just where you put your chips. Maybe you put some resources toward these smaller chips, but what are your chances of picking the right smaller chips? And so I think you're not claiming a position of omniscience in a lot of ways. To take this position is just sort of to estimate where it's likely to come from. And I think there's just a high chance that it comes out of that larger developer community that has a long-standing dialogue with all these problems. So, to talk about the problems being solved on the layer twos, how they're addressing scalability there, like with ZK Sync and Cairo, and that language and that approach to scaling, and those privacy protections that go that add a layer of privacy to this public ledger, provide a new set of interfaces that allow people to have faith in their transactions, but also not feel like they're automatically doxed to the world. They're not airing their dirty laundry everywhere. Right.
And that makes sense. And it's also kind of, if you're thinking about it from an investment standpoint, it's kind of the quote that kind of popped out at me was Warren Buffett's quote, is like, no one wants to hear that the right answer is to just buy Coke and wait 20 years.
Right.
And it can be very exciting. And I think in this space particularly, there's a lot of that shiny object syndrome of here's this other thing. And some of them there will be some that if they stay around, and but yeah, you do see the trend of coming, the innovation coming out of Ethereum and then being forked elsewhere for large part. Another question I had, I wanted to have you dive deep into, that I think, you and I have both gotten quite a bit, is how would you explain to a layperson or someone who's just not quite as, in depth into this world, is like, I don't, they might say something like, I don't know, man. I don't really get this whole blockchain thing, especially, these NFTs. They seem like it just seems like a craze. It seems like it's like the tulip mania, as I've gotten that a few times, going back to the craze of the tulip mania back in, I think, in Amsterdam, and how it was just like one of the largest bubbles of all time. And they don't see the value in NFTs, or they're just overpriced JPEGs, et cetera. What would you say to a person who's like, I want to understand the value there. I want to understand what that is. What is that? What would that look like to you? That pitch of just like, I'm an interested person to understand what this is all about, but I don't get it.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was pretty late to the NFT idea in this cycle. I didn't start aping into them. I think I lost a lot of my inherent excitement toward tokens and trading in the last cycle. My conclusion after the 2017 cycle was that all my mistakes came from trading, and all of my winnings came from being too scared to move a large portion of my assets. And so I think in a lot of ways, the best trader is still no trader, like buy and sit on it and don't do anything. But there are very interesting things about this NFT idea. And some of the first NFTs didn't do amazingly well. CryptoKitties kind of clogged up the network. That was probably one of our first big gas wars back in 2017. But then we didn't really hear anything about them this cycle. And it's because they didn't grab on to this critical factor, which appears to be scarcity. So CryptoPunks came out in 2017, and they were out there on the market and you could buy them apparently pretty cheap. I didn't get one, but they were pretty cheap before 2020. Yeah. And this scarcity of the collection, it's at some point you realize that only a small number of people can have them. And that means that you have a relatively small number of people who you need to protect the value of that asset. It's also not a share, so they're not fungible. And so they fall outside of this idea of a security. But there is a group of them. So there is sort of this idea of community, and people have a long history of trying to establish hierarchy and trying to create in-groups and out-groups and find things that express bits of who they are, and then find people who are like that. And so just going with the current formula, that's the need they fill in humanity, is they give us a very public, a very sort of easy to grab onto way of quickly claiming group membership with, through a piece of art where you share a little bit of identity. And then it further allows us to express hierarchy through the idea of rares and rarity.
Right.
If you have a legendary in a community, not only is it worth a lot more money, but it probably changes who you are in that community. And so I think, and maybe this is a little bit darker or more interesting, but I think there's something about the escapism of NFTs where I get the sense that the reason that the values of these things can be so elevated is partly because when people are buying them, what they're buying is a dice roll at being a more elevated member in some group, in some community.
Wow.
That's a very attractive idea. So that's my thoughts on the more human side of it. So that's what people are buying. And while it might be difficult to identify with the surface level of idea of buying a monkey picture and why is that worth $250,000 for some reason, it's certainly very easy for a lot of people to relate to the idea of, hey, what can I do to get myself into a community that understands me, or that I feel closer to, that reflects something that I want to express about myself? And how do I get higher? How do I get more recognized, or how do I become more important in that community? I think that's a very human idea that a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's something we have seen really, really fascinating. Like it's been something really fascinating that we've seen in communities of our clients, and the ones that are really good at creating this hierarchical structure and the game theory that goes along with that. There tends to be just this like ravenous effects inside the community to try to find those individual pieces, or to claim them, or to trade them or buy them. I guess still though, like if I were just someone who's like, well, I don't get it. Why, what is this? You're saying that it's just, I'm buying my way into this community. What is this community? It all seems like a bubble, and I don't understand why anyone would pay this much money for it. Is it really people buying status inside of these communities that have just popped up seemingly like overnight or over the course of, weeks or months?
No, yeah, but that's a formula that has worked, right? But
Mhm.
the big thing, the big idea I see as a developer, when I make these NFTs and I put them on the chain, what do people really have when they have an NFT? I'm looking at it, and what they
Token
have
ID.
is they have a token ID. They don't have the art. The art lives on IPFS. And if I kill the last copy of that on IPFS, then I have a dead hash that doesn't resolve anywhere. So they didn't buy the art in a way, in a really defensible way. If anything else in that so that metadata is kind of fallible, but the thing that we can never get rid of is that token and the ID and the amount paid for it, the amount that was transferred to get it, and that it's associated with this contract that was launched by these people. So the association with the other wallets that also hold those tokens. So my conclusion is that we've created a system of public receipts, and we don't usually think of receipts as incredibly meaningful, unless you're thinking about, claiming expenses on it, figuring out expenses on your taxes to make deductions or something like that. But we also just spent 15 years living with Facebook and Google selling us our demographic data at, a several dollars a click. And what do these several dollar clicks represent? Well, they represent that the advertiser did their research to figure out what demographics
Right.
the people on the other end belong to, what their interests are. Probably they've got some calculations about what those people have bought in the past, what their income level is like, what they're likely to buy again. And they are selling you sentiment in that way. They're selling you likelihood of engagement, likelihood of overlap between you and your product and this anonymous person that they're putting in front of your message.
Right.
And what's more valuable, Google or Facebook, who don't really know your product or your community, but just have guesses based on what they know about their graph network? Or if you had a giant, let's skip ahead to the future and let's assume that this blockchain wallet has come to dominate the majority of financial activity, like people buying their coffee, people buying their concert tickets, people buying their car, choosing where they're going to live, their daily routine, what stores they're buying things from physically. And there's this tangible trail of receipts littered all over this public blockchain. So in a sense, every wallet starts to tell a story. It tells a story of who's buying what, when, in what order. Now I want you to imagine someone who is really into, I'm going to use guitars because that was at one point a fascination in my life. If you were buying different effects pedals, amplifiers, guitars, picks, straps, whatever, if you were going through this investigation to find the best gear that fit you, if I could see your purchase history, I would know certain things about styles of music you were trying to imitate. I would know things about how much it's worth to you because I would see the quality of the gear that you were buying. I could tell whether or not you thought of yourself as a pro or if you thought of yourself as someone who's just getting into it or whatever. And if I really knew that market, I might be able to have advanced information about what would be really appealing to you. I might know what the next amplifier is or the next product is based on what you've bought before. I would know things about what you are likely to buy, what you aren't likely to buy. And I could put it in front of you. I could even airdrop a coupon. I could airdrop a discount into your wallet without knowing who you are. And I could do it for free.
So you think that, you're essentially saying that this allows, for this system of receipts to be built on, or to be built from, individual addresses, because people are going to be able to see who's buying what, and get a lot of information on these individual wallets. Do you not see this? Why is this a better system than what Facebook or Google was doing? Why is this? It almost sounds like it's giving marketers even more information into our lives, and even more privacy concerns could come out of that. Is that plausible to think that that's just, you're replacing one system that people are already annoyed and pissed off about for another one?
I think there's, at the current time, yeah, it is. So there's a lot of truth to that, right? So if you were to make no extra innovations on top of the public the blockchain networks that we have now, I think that sort of thing would get very dystopian, or could get very dystopian very fast. But I think there's a couple things that are different. One, the outsized influence and the incentive to polarize people and cause conversations that we aren't very proud of, that come with these big, I guess you could call them attention aggregators. And one, you would sort of get rid of those incentives. You would get more right directly at the meat of advertising in a way. Two, you take away the middleman in a way. It's not Facebook or Google acting as a middleman to tell the advertiser who his customer is. It's just the advertiser going out there and seeing who bought what, and then trying to find their natural audience. It feels more direct.
And their incentives are different, because they just want to sell you their shit. They don't want to capture your attention for endless amounts of time on a website, so that they can then get as much advertisement revenue as possible. So it's a different incentive structure. That's what you're saying.
And if they really believed you were in market, they might just incentivize you directly.
Just drop you a coupon. Yeah, just send you something directly.
So if I could just drop you money, like I drop you a coupon, but I could also, I could also try to incentivize you by, giving you some reciprocal benefit, like just giving you money or in some asset or another. But so that's, I think we aren't really trading a significantly better world for the previous one if we just stop at today's technology. But I think when you bring in this idea of the ZK proof, the ZK rollup, the zero knowledge proof, things get very exciting, because the idea of a zero knowledge proof is that I can create an interface where I'm allowed to ask certain questions about the network or about a wallet without ever seeing the actual data. And the questions that I'm allowed to ask are agreed upon by both parties.
So I could ask, are you 18?
And you'd get a yes or no back.
Okay.
Or maybe it wouldn't even allow that. Maybe it would just say, are you over 18? And it might send back a yes or no, but it might not, allow you to ask the specific number.
Right. Over 18 would have been a better one. Yeah.
Or I might be able to ask if this person is into fly fishing, or if this person has ever purchased a fly fishing product before, or a product from this particular vendor. Get back a yes or no.
Who agrees on these questions?
So because I've created this interface, and because we're in the world of payments, I've created incentives for both sides, right? So if I'm creating this advertising contract that you can subscribe to. So if no one subscribes to these advertising contracts, no information is visible. It's all opaque, like obscured stuff. But if I subscribe to this interface that allows people to ask queries of my wallet about my history, I'm probably doing it for a financial benefit of some kind. And so it's in my interests both to not have my time wasted and to get accurate offers and to maximize the amount of money I get from the contract. So now I have this very strange incentive to tell my life story and my purchase history and my interests to this advertising contract to maximize the volume and the quality and the monetary
Right.
reward that comes my way. Because you could say that for every time that advertiser gets to ask, is this person older than, above 18, they have to pay a thousandth of a cent or
Right.
a penny or whatever the market value of that
Right.
information is. And part of that goes directly to the wallet holder and then maybe a little bit to the team that maintains the interface contract.
So you see a new ecosystem of marketing evolving out of this, that's based off this repository of receipts that will be accumulated in individual addresses. And then you'll see in future innovation a level of security built on top of these addresses that allows for them to interface with advertisers without them knowing everything about who this person is, and only knowing pertinent information, whether this is their target market that they want to speak to.
That's exactly the idea. Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of how I see this going. And I remember when this is the future of receipts, like idea hit me, how big that felt. A lot of these ideas that the crypto community will give you, or these technologies will give you, you think about what they imply in the limit, taken to their logical extremes. And it's just such a heavy conclusion that you almost like back up off of it and try to forget you ever had the idea the first time.
Interesting. And that would be it would really reshape so much in our world, because even geopolitical maneuverings seem to be heavily influenced by the current advertising system, hilariously. And how did that happen? Right? How did we get there? So if that were to be a future that could be brought in by this technology, it would be, I would think the people that would understand it would be like a welcoming, it would be like, oh, you're telling me I can have really relevant information sent to me without people knowing who I am and knowing every little detail about what I clicked on previously, or all of these other avenues. That's So anything else that you see, and just where you see this NFT movement going? Do you see it breaking into other worlds other than advertising or marketing?
I mean, I think the first people that I ever talked to about NFTs, the exciting ideas were the idea of representing a house with it, representing big pieces of property with it. But the entanglements with the real world make it seem like that innovation is actually going to come last. That's going to be the last thing that happens.
The securities
not the first
problem
thing that happens. It's at once the most, securities, or that with property, with houses, you just have the deeds. I mean, I got a house back in August of last year, and I've never signed so much paperwork. I don't even know half the things I signed. It's just so much. And so the idea of creating this little blockchain record and then doing all the work to get all those parties and systems involved to acknowledge the validity of that little blockchain record as representing the deed on a house, I boggled. The mind reels trying to wrap my mind around all the work that goes into making that so.
Right. And then having it be having like a deed kept inside of like a vault on the blockchain that would only be released from one party to the next upon fulfillment of a payment. Is that the idea?
Something like that. I'd imagine that, let's say if you're BlackRock or something, then you just have thousands of houses that they're your deeds. You can do whatever you want with them. You can make your own little MLS. You can make your own little private real estate listing system, and your real estate listing system could be built on NFTs. And to the rest of the legal world, BlackRock owns 1,000 houses, but inside of BlackRock's NFT ecosystem, the NFT holder owns house number 347. So you could insulate, you could sort of buy from the traditional system. If you had tons of capital, you could kind of put up an opaque wall and you could have the new digital world of asset transfer make sense inside of your garden. And then you could just grow that garden and expand until you make the old system irrelevant. That sounds like a crazy way to solve that problem, but it's easy to imagine how to start.
And then the ability to fractionalize ownership of that, what does that look like? And is that, you see there being many barriers just with the investment piece of that becomes kind of the last piece of the last domino to fall? Or
well, isn't that sort of that's sort of the heartbreaking part of all this, is that we have these tools that very obviously allow us to turn everything into equity, turn everything into a stock. And it would be so easy, but we don't have it worked out with the real world. The SEC thinks so. In the past, equities or just the handling of money and where it goes after it leaves one party's hands into the other for 100 years has been, or maybe even longer, has been an extremely opaque process. Mm-hmm. We know by nature nothing about where that money goes once it's handed to the bank teller. It's on regulation, and it's on regulation essentially to make sure that counterparty is held accountable for where they put that money and how they store it and how they keep it safe and how they lend it out and how they don't lend it. Like it's opaque. If they
lend it out 5 times,
they lend it out 5 times, and then there's a run in the bank and they don't have any money to give back. And then, so that system is opaque by nature. And we built all of our regulations to cope with that. The crypto system is transparent by nature, and we're being sort of punished by analogy to a system that's opaque by nature. It doesn't make any sense. Whereas I read an idea that I thought was really brilliant. What if the IRS just had a website where you could put in your smart contract address and you could say, this is my address. I control this entity. I attest that I am legally accountable, taxable for all of its activity. Come to me and I'll pay you your cut. And that could be done. That could be a complete securities offering. If the government were to recognize it as such, they could apply all the rules. They have all the transparency on what that contract is doing down to the last penny. And they could just calculate and send you your bill. And then if you thought the financial picture looked different, you could send back that letter. But we don't need to treat this new system as if it has the same characteristics as the old system, because it doesn't. There's a new way we can treat equities, and it gives everyone down to the most common citizen the ability to get an idea funded safely in a way.
What an interesting problem that I thought of that I wonder kind of what, like, so in this instance that you just laid out, and in the one where, we are a wallet full of receipts and we have people that can send us things, airdrop us things, you could see it. I guess the disincentive of like the spam on that was the fact that there's a network fee associated with sending something. And so that would prohibit, I actually kind of saw that as I was saying, is like, you wouldn't just have airdrop someone endlessly and fill up their wallet full of crap because it costs you to do so on the network fee. But what if someone just dropped you? I mean, this is kind of a silly analogy you probably wouldn't be too upset about, but someone just dropped you $10,000 into your wallet, that you have no idea where the hell it came from. And then you're like, well, I got to pay taxes. I guess I'm okay with that though. I guess. But
what am I going to do with all this money?
Oh no! Oh no!
No!
But, I guess you hope that it's coming from a good place. If you're gonna, I guess it's just an interesting idea, is that you can't really stop a transaction from going from one address to the next, and so
I would say the big problem we have with Facebook, Google, Amazon, whatever is that we know we're being taken advantage of. Yeah. We know that in the last 20, 30 years, an industry more valuable than oil was discovered, and it is our information in aggregate. It is our basic information. It's the stuff that you tell people when they ask you where you're from and what you like. Like that's stuff that we just say every day blithely, but apparently in aggregate,
It's very
it's worth more
valuable.
than oil.
Yeah.
It's and so like we're all indignant, especially if you even think about the profit numbers of a Facebook or a Google. It's just offensive. It's like, hey, you're literally profiting off of me. Don't shove it in my face or whatever. In a way, when you see how the advertising platform works and how products get marketed, and you're like, all right, well, I fit into this 18 to 35-year-old male demographic that listens to these sources and whatever. So therefore, these people knew that this product might appeal to me with a 75% probability, and they're paying $3-4 a click to get that thing in front of me. And I benefit not at all from that. I lose time and energy thinking about a product. And we kind of know there is a bit of a solution in that if they were to actually send part of that money directly to you, but that's never going to happen. Not with this system.
No.
And if they did, you wouldn't even be mad. You might even want more ads. It might be the new form of universal basic income. Like if to keep the world
an interesting one. Yeah. Kind of like what Brave is, proposing, where you can watch ads on your browser and get paid for it.
Sort of. Yeah. Like if Brave was a big sophisticated advertising platform.
Yeah.
How much money would come through? Like I've seen how much Google charges.
If it was
for
Chrome,
a click.
right? Yeah.
If it was Chrome. If that was Google's primary advertising mechanism, how much money would that be? Would it be $500 a month? I think I imagine at least $500 a month of advertising gets steered at me. At least.
Yeah. And then you'd have to calculate valuing geographically if this person's advertising budget is worth more than someone elsewhere in the world, or that could be an interesting
It's sort of like a
dynamic that exists.
Yeah, it's like a layer of entropy on top. So like businesses, they get money from being successful at attracting customers, and then they sort of have to take a risk by reprojecting that money into marketing, and that goes into a bunch of people's pockets. And maybe you could think of it as like the precipitation cycle. The sun heats up, evaporates the water becomes clouds, and the clouds rain down on the land, and it goes in a circle. You kind of think about that, like the business comes up with an idea and it broadcasts that idea, and then that, evaporates money out of, I guess, the people or the ocean in this case, and the steam goes up, turns into clouds, which is profit. And then the profit goes over the land.
It rains down on the land.
Rains down on the people's attention, which is the land. So the land is the people's attention, and the ocean is the people themselves. And then the cloud is profit, or it should be, in a virtuous cycle. But really what we have happening is that the cloud moves over and rains on Facebook. And then that's what we got now. And we got to get it over the land, which is the people's attention. And then, so we rain the money right on the wallets, and then everything is fixed. I think that's how we fix the world.
Let's make it rain,
That's what I've been doing for years. I think I've been doing that.
Right on, man. Well, it's been a great conversation. I think that's the time. And looking forward to the next one. This was good. And hopefully there's some people get some value out of it.
Yeah. Hopefully someone got something out of that.
One person. There we go.
Cheers.
Right on, man. Talk soon. Cheers.
Everybody.